Thank you for joining the webinar. To anyone who has joined us early, we'll be starting the webinar just after 1 p.m. Please note that you'll be on mute for the duration of the webinar, and if you have any technical difficulties, please contact myself as the host via the Q&A box. Thank you for joining the webinar. To anyone who has joined us early, we'll be starting the webinar just after 1 p.m. Please note that you'll be on mute for the duration of the webinar, and if you have any technical difficulties, please contact myself as the host via the Q&A box. Thank you for joining the webinar. We'll be starting just after 1 o'clock so that the last few people dial in. Please note that you'll be on mute for the duration of the webinar, and if you have any technical difficulties, please contact myself as the host via the Q&A box.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining today's webinar. As you can see from the screen, we will be exploring diversity and inclusion in the construction and property sector. My name is Richard Gelder. I'm UK Director for Hayes Construction Property, and my role today is to chair proceedings. We've got three punchy presentations from our speakers today over the next 45 minutes or so. Going from the top, we have Yvonne Smythe. Yvonne is the Group Head of Diversity and Inclusion at Hayes. She'll be providing an overview to diversity and inclusion today and sharing some insights from Hayes research and reports. Next, we have Fiona Jackson. Fiona is Head of Diversity, Inclusion and Employer Branding at EDF Energy. And Fiona will talk around the EDF journey in diversity and inclusion and some of the key steps and actions they've taken and lessons learned. And finally, we have Nick Jones from Cundall. Nick has taken a lead in championing D&I strategy within Cundall, and he will share some of his experiences from there. So hopefully a really good session over the next 45 minutes or so. We will do the Q&A at the end, and if you have any questions that you want to raise, if you can please use the Q&A box in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. So, without further ado, I'll pass over to you, Yvonne.
Thank you very much, Richard, and everybody, thank you very much for joining us. I hope you're having an opportunity to have your lunch at the same time as listening in. I think Richard mentioned the slides will be shared after the webinar. So hopefully have a listen and see whether what we say feels relevant and appropriate to your business and your role within that. So really, first slide from me, it's really reminding us why we wanted to put this webinar together. And the D&I space feels very busy at the moment, seems to be everywhere, sometimes in a fairly kind of shrill tone. Sometimes it is a cause for conversation, like the Gillette ad that has had a lot of press and a lot of talk around it. And sometimes there's a celebration around D&I, and I don't know if any of you saw the National Television Awards last week, but an actor on Emmerdale was awarded Best Newcomer, and he has severe cerebral palsy, and that was an absolute celebration and kind of brought a tear to the eye in terms of socialising disability in the mainstream, if you like. So it feels like it's everywhere. What we do know is in this really fast-moving world, and we're in a VUCA world, a world that is volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, it's ambiguous, doing nothing is not an option. The question is what to focus on, what to do, what to action that feels appropriate to your organisation and the sector in which you operate. And that's why we were really keen to convene this group together to really have a deeper dive into some of the challenges, opportunities, and risks, if nothing is done, that face the construction and property sector. So delighted to have you for that reason. Within our C&P business, we have 400 consultants at Hayes, based around the UK, working across 11 specialist areas. And in virtually every meeting that those consultants have with employers, and indeed the talent as well, the jump-off point for us as leading recruiters is clearly skills shortages. But actually, when we start talking about skills shortages, the conversation, certainly over the last 12 to 18 months, has really quite quickly widened to a more strategic picture around talent management. How can I bring in the talent that I'm looking for? And that talent, because of skill shortages, sometimes has to come from really different talent pools to perhaps where we've sourced previously. So there's a kind of a reactive piece, and also and we want to stay current and on top of opportunities that our markets present. So the conversations tend to move towards that, and also they then move towards, and actually when that talent comes to our business, how do we make the most of it? How do we help that talent fulfill its potential? And so really for us as a business, over the last 12 months, particularly in the C&P sector, with Richard's leadership and also his co-director, Duncan Bullimore, we've been building some real momentum, and we've been really seeing that momentum building across the sector and the employers with whom we work. And we see this as a fairly collaborative space. You'll see from the presentations that both Fiona and Nick are going to give, there are some fabulous examples of best practice out there. And we would welcome you to network with those who impress you and have shared in common experiences. As a business, we've had a closer look at the D&I sector, or the C&P sector with a D&I lens. And just over the course of the last year, we've done a webinar a bit like this around really looking at how to kind of set and capture progression using data. I'll touch on that a bit later. And in conjunction with Building Magazine, we have produced the second of a planned 3 reports we have with them, where we looked at really what was the current state and the direction of travel for the sector, so equality under construction. If you'd like a copy of that, we'd of course be delighted to share that with you. A further extension of that report and some of the themes that came off it is planned for later on this year. So let's get our head in the game here. There are 4 slides in front of you. Top left, for any of you who are familiar with D&I, you'll be familiar with these 2 phrases, really kind of differentiating, articulating what we mean by diversity and inclusion. They are 2 distinct things, but they do go hand in hand. On the top right-hand side, this is really just reminding us that if we get this agenda right, it is truly transformational, both for individuals who have improved access to opportunities and progression within the kind of world of work and their lives, and also the impact that perhaps that difference can have in an organization. And actually, we use this phrase here at Hayes. We are a people business. D&I ultimately is about people. And when we ignite our consultants, or look to ignite them about the importance and the impact of what they do, if they do their job well, actually is transformational in the same way that D&I is. Bottom left, there is definitely a gathering momentum around expectation and transparency and reporting in how organizations and employers are running their businesses, with a very close eye on diversity and inclusion and sustainability and healthy profits. And so the FRC code that's really being shaped at the moment has very much put this front and center on any large organization's board agenda. Bottom right-hand side, it's again really here just to remind us that it's not just D&I. There's a big piece around culture, and you can make all the changes that you would like, all the policies and processes and procedures, but if your culture isn't right, basically forget it. And it's not just breakfast, it's lunch and dinner as well. This is really a very kind of dynamic and evolving space at the moment. So this slide is really just meant to remind us that the context has changed, but is constantly evolving. So it's really moved from a kind of risk mitigation perspective, fear of discrimination, what does the law say, to looking at diversity and what do we mean by that and what do we mean by difference. That has then evolved through to once you bring a difference into your organization and you have a whole host of different backgrounds and perspectives and profiles, actually, can you bring everyone together and have an inclusive environment? And actually reminding us at the end there that we're all in this together, and it's all around encouraging everyone and having an environment where everyone feels that they belong, and everyone has a role to play. You do not need to be one of the above. And talking about one of the above, let's just remind ourselves of the protected characteristics. So really going back to that dial, the first dial, equality, on the previous slide. There are 9 protected characteristics. We would see most organizations looking to move the dial on 5 of those. Most organizations, again, would start with gender, highly visible, huge opportunity to bring women into the workplace and keep them in particular. Again, in HR, that conversation may be more around bringing men into the sector and the organization, ditto with something like nursing or teaching. But basically, most organizations will start with gender, and I know that Fiona and Nick are going to talk a little bit around that. Then really what we're seeing in terms of the additional asterisks is there is a big piece around race, and that can be quite closely linked to, in some areas, to social mobility. So what does that mean at the moment? Quite a lot of structure and scaffolding going around that, particularly with the ethnicity, race reporting that's being shaped at the moment by the government. Sexual orientation is a really big piece. For me, that's very much a proxy word for culture. And there's a huge amount of work being done, very well socialised, and a lot of celebration across the world of work for really creating environments where people can bring their full selves to work. We then have age, which interestingly, historically would have been a big focus on young people coming into the workplace and making sure that, you know, one's contribution is captured early on and it's not time served. I think the ticking time bomb at the moment is the fact we have an aging population. It's particularly relevant in this sector. And I know that there'll be some discussion around that later on as well. But from our perspective as recruiters, it is perhaps less of bringing in a number of older workers in terms of our recruitment activities. The bigger issue, I think, for employers in the world of work in this sector is actually how do you keep people who want to and or need to stay in work in their more senior years? How do you keep them productive, and how can you keep them working in a way that suits everybody, them personally, and the needs of the business? Disability, lastly, in terms of the main movement we see, is an area that most employers and most organisations are terrified about. Particularly, there's fear of claims. Am I using the right type of language? What I would say is that actually a well-intentioned conversation with comfortable language that perhaps you introduce into your organisation, but certainly well-intentioned, is a fantastic place to start. And it's a two-way street. There is a big piece around workplace adjustments and the way that that can transform someone's ability to do their job, and the return, if you like, that we get from them in terms of productivity. And the access and progression of people with disabilities in work is a huge, huge opportunity as we look across the UK at the moment. Very quickly, those were the protected characteristics, and social mobility, whilst not a protected characteristic, is a huge issue here in the UK. Actually, really what we're talking about when we talk about diversity is just difference. The concept of the iceberg, I think, is a useful jump-off point here, and there are clearly visible differences. There is a lot of invisible difference, and ultimately, all of those go into this whole discussion around diversity. And given that we are actually all unique, when you have a look at those aspects of the iceberg, it really means that we're all diverse at the end of the day. And on the left-hand side of that slide there, it's really just reminding us that the two can't be seen in isolation. It's very important to recognise that actually let's bring difference in its richest sense. But actually, there is no point having that difference coming in if the voices can't be celebrated and heard and the contribution really recognised. So it's very important that the two go together in order to get the dividend. If you have high levels of diversity and low levels of difference, you get discord and dysfunction. If you have high levels of, or I should say low levels of diversity and high levels of inclusion, you tend to get groupthink. So that doesn't work either. So it's very important to have the two going together. And what is a dividend? Basically, the business case at the highest sense is a slam dunk. The business case is made. The challenge really is it's seeing what is appropriate and relevant to your organisation in terms of where it is now. And there is certainly always an element of tailoring that needs to be made. I'm going to mention very briefly unconscious bias because that is spoken about a lot, again, as a jump-off point when we look at the playthrough of why is there underrepresentation, how does that come about during a life cycle or an entry point. And I would just say that it tends to get a little bit of a bad rap, because I think there is something around kind of complacency and we've all got it and it's just one of those things. But actually, you can really have a look at mitigating the impact of bias through a series of nudges, if it is relatively low-lying, and then a series of some stronger measures if it's much more prevalent in your organisation. But it does exist, and it has a massive impact in terms of actually keeping a balanced and level playing field for everyone when we do look at the world of work. So I'll leave that there just at the moment. There's a couple of quite nice little shots there that I think just get the brain cells thinking about, ultimately we're all looking there at the same images. But on the left-hand side, I would say, do you see a duck or do you see a hare? We're all looking at the same thing. Do you see 4 steps or 3 steps? We're all looking at the same thing. And perhaps going a little bit more into the kind of emotion side of things. On the bottom right-hand side, this was actually an image that HSBC used a number of years ago in a series of adverts, and you'll see that it's a bald head of a lady, shaved head, and what's your first impression on that? Is it style? Is it soldier? Is it survivor? We're all looking at the same thing. We'll think something different, I'm sure. Very quickly, as Richard said, Hays does produce a lot of insights into the world of work. Some of them are sector-specific, like the Equality Under Construction report that I referenced earlier on. We also look at some kind of dedicated D&I assets, which really take it up a few levels. This is a report that we did in the early part of last year that we'll be basically extending and developing later on this year. But in our opinion and in our experience of working with employers and with talent, every day of the week, there are 5 key elements that are essential, and if you get them right, then actually you do create a more diverse and inclusive environment for everybody. They are the importance of inclusive leadership, data capture, how do you reach out to talent and then progress it once it's in, so any element of kind of selection, workplace culture, and career management. There are several slides here, and actually I'm not going to spend time on them now because you'll have a copy of the slides. And I have asked both Fiona and Nick to talk about these elements in a little bit more detail. But I want to say at this stage that the lived experience of many professionals does fall short of the potential that each of these themes basically brings through, and that they are kind of designed to address. So just be aware that there is a deficit. We have lots of recommendations and some context setting in the report. Happy to share a copy with you that talks about why these elements are important, what the lived experience tends to be now, and some recommendations to kind of narrow the gap and improve the experience. So I won't spend time on those now, but hopefully you'll find those useful just in terms of some prompts and also some points to think about. I'm going to draw your attention to one slide in particular, the one in front of you, which is around data. And really the key bit here is you need to be innovative and creative in really understanding what your current starting point is, where you're headed, and how you can measure an improvement in your kind of diversity and, importantly, your culture of inclusiveness in your organization. So hopefully you'll find those prompts helpful. We move on in the green there to actually, you have to really be aware of what your shop window looks like. It's amazing how people can get kind of caught up in that. We do a lot of research when we talk to talent, and we're saying, what's important to you when you're either looking to stay in a job or move to a new role. And this is a report that we ran last year, and not just for the C&P sector, but really across all sectors, thousands of responses. And it is amazing how after you look at basically, is my career going in the right direction, and am I developing, the importance of, let me see what you're doing around ED&I. Let me see what your brand and your kind of mission is in the sense of purpose. And also, actually, what are you doing on the CSR side in terms of sustainable business and corporate responsibility? It's really, really important to talent, and that's talent at all levels. Big inspection piece here around, if there are all sorts of ways in which an organisation can show that they are a diverse and inclusive employer. And some inspection is required, such as gender pay reporting, for example. Others are voluntary. But those who are looking for signals and for information will be looking for information like this as evidence points. And if they are not seeing it, there will be an assumption that you are not doing anything in this space if you're silent. So you don't have to have all the answers, but you do need to show areas where you have focused on and where you've made some kind of progression. And it's fine to say we're on the journey, please come with us. Culture is really important. Lots of set pieces that you can get behind there. Communication, really, really important as well. And I spoke about the importance of culture earlier on. Interestingly, with a previous report that we've run around kind of what workers want, it's amazing, that the bottom right-hand side there, 36% said they would take a pay cut for a better cultural fit. life-work integration is important, and flexible working is absolutely massive in terms of a consideration. And I'm just going to draw your attention to a campaign that we're going to be running later on this year, where we're looking to bring that conversation around flexible working to the point of hire, so earlier in the kind of life cycle. And we're going to be getting behind a campaign where we are encouraging employers to consider flexibility at point of hire. And just as a point of note, flexibility does not mean part-time necessarily. Career progression is extremely important. Big focus in the C&P area and a number of other sectors is around women and the progression of women. Once they're in organisations, we run a network called Hayes Leading Women. Actually, we have an event this evening, funnily enough. And basically, these are key considerations that seem to really resonate with female professionals. Clearly, they resonate with everybody, but some particular attention we would encourage particular attention, being paid to these particular areas when we're looking to really make sure that women are in a position where they have the confidence and the knowledge, frankly, and awareness of keeping their feet to the floor. Last thing from me, you need a plan. So a couple of slides here that really just set out in a really simple format, how you can articulate this and capture, the potentially forward movement for your organisation and indeed for your career. So hopefully that's helpful. I'm going to pass back to Richard briefly, and we will carry on.
Lovely, thank you, Yvonne. I think that's just a really good place to start the webinar, a really thorough scene setting. So now we're going to pass over to Fiona Jackson from EDF, and Fiona is going to take us into her world of work and share some insights from the EDF perspective. Fiona, over to you.
Thanks very much indeed, Richard, and thank you for inviting me to take part today. So a bit of background on me. I've been in EDF Energy for 17 years, and 10 years ago I was actually in a commercial director role looking after pricing and setting prices for electricity and gas in the UK, and I found myself the most senior woman around that table with no more women alongside me other than those in HR, and no disrespect to HR because I'm now in it. And I've decided to do something about it and founded a Women Network, and that was my first foray into diversity and inclusion. And so what have we done since, and where have we gone? So EDF Energy, if you're not aware, and hopefully most of you are aware now, it's quite a big brand name in the UK, we're the largest generator and supplier of electricity. We run 8 nuclear power stations and 2 gas stations, which means we have a very large generating industrial engineering business. Largely populated by men, a lot of them getting on in age, started working at the stations when they were first built. But we're also building new nuclear power stations, which means we've got a business at the moment that is growing, very based on construction and focused with construction partners, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And we have a supply business. That's the other half of our business. We supply to large commercial organisations as well as domestic customers, very different in makeup. It's roughly 50-50 female and male, much more about customer services and marketing. So very different skill sets across our business. And so to come together 10 years ago and look at, well, what are we going to do? And the first thing that we did, which I'm really interested to see as one of your recommendations, Yvonne, in your paper, is we decided what are we doing and why. And we came up with this compelling rationale, we called it. And this was generated 10 years ago, that stood the test of time. We've done a little bit of work on it that I'll talk about in a minute more recently. But it's really important to understand why are we doing any of this. So we were very keen to understand the value. And it wasn't just a nice thing to do. It was about that business value that you alluded to, Yvonne, in terms of really understanding why we should invest money, resources and time into having a more diverse and inclusive organisation. You can read the words for yourself, but they resonate in our business in very different ways. So whilst this is an EDF Energy-wide set of statements, obviously the first one, that's greater trust and understanding of customers' needs, is fundamentally really important to our customers' business, as is that competitive edge. An increasing number of energy suppliers in the market means we do need to keep innovating to outperform some of our competitors. Whereas when you look at things like the attraction, we're a growing business building the new nuclear power station at Hinkley Point C. We need more talent to come and join us to help us do that. So that's a really important one for that part of the business. And safety is fundamental both in that part of the business and also in our generation business. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about how that's coming through in some of the initiatives and the actions that we're undertaking in a moment. We've got 9 employee networks that help us deliver this. And more recently, we've changed how we do this. So 5 years ago, when I took over the role of head of D&I, we had a very large organising group made up of HR and network chairs. And we were driving a lot of this change through the HR function. And whilst a lot of change needs to happen in the HR function, we've got so far and found that actually now we need to take some bigger steps and do things slightly differently. So we, this year, have redesigned our operating model to be led by a diversity and inclusion strategy group, which is made up by the line. So it has got HR representation on it, me and the Chief People Officer. But other than that, we've got senior leadership team members from each of our business. And their job is now to look at that strategy and to build business unit plans. Because our businesses are so different, one plan wasn't working for us all. So we've taken it, we've flipped it on its head, and we've devolved it into a different operating model. And what we're finding is, I know a lot less about what's going on, but that's fine, because other people do and are doing the right thing that they need to do for their business. We're getting very local, delivered action plans that don't need the constraints of a single head of to deliver. So we're really evolving this through the business. And I'll talk a little bit more of one of those examples in a moment. So let's start with gender. I talked about the fact that we've got to do recruitment. We're in the STEM sector. We face some of the same issues that you face in the construction industry from an engineering perspective. The market for women in this sector is not the largest. So we decided with one of our initiatives to have a big play on that. There's a lot of people that have got a lot of initiatives out there, and we launched Pretty Curious. Now, Pretty Curious has now existed for 3 years, and we're evolving it at the moment. So it started as a centrally driven programme to raise awareness of the issue that there are not enough girls in these areas, because we recognise that it's teachers, it's parents, as well as the girls themselves, that need to understand that these are careers that young women can have, and they're careers that pay well in the engineering sector. So, you know, and there's lots of demand for them in the UK. So it's a good area to get into. And so to do that, we did some filming. And the bottom picture, called I'm Pretty Focused, is an example of that video that we ran. And in order to get big leverage in the market, we partnered with films. The first partnership we did was with Hidden Figures, and if you haven't seen it, I totally recommend it. Really interesting story about a group of women who really helped get the first astronauts into space in the space race in the 60s. But you know what? Some of the things about where the toilets were for this woman to be able to get to still resonate today. And if you've seen it, you know what I mean, and if you haven't, you'll have to go and watch. But it was a very gender as well as ethnicity-focused film, and it really fitted with our brand values. And then the other film that we did that got even further, and we did this last year, and it was so exciting, is we partnered with Disney. And we co-branded the adverts for their new Star Wars film. You might recognise that picture on the left. It had a very, very powerful female role model, but it also had the major engineering character was a female character as well. So it fitted with what we were trying to do. Both of these things were about awareness. The number of people who've watched those films is in the millions, and we know it resonated because the amount of unprompted contacts that we've had into our Twitter sites, etc. So, raise awareness. The second thing we wanted to do was create role models. You know, knowing that there are careers that you can have, you've got to create those realistic role models. So, the right-hand side is one of the websites that you can see behind there. And through that website, we were driving attention to the role models, and there's lots of little smaller videos all out on YouTube on our channel to do that. And then the final thing we wanted to do with the role models is have empowering experiences. So one thing to do awareness, the other thing to see some people that you could be. The final area that we wanted to focus on was to give you something hands-on and memorable that makes you interested. And we were very much focused on girls who might. So the ones that, oh, I could have a career, I quite like arts, but also I'm quite good at science, I'm not quite sure what I want to do. We were very much about trying to get to those girls and encourage them to come away from these experiences thinking more about, okay, I'll do the science and the engineering, because actually I can apply my artistic skills into it. And the whole debate about STEM or STEAM is something that was very much behind our thinking here. And we held a load of events, which you can see in the right-hand corner there. led by the most amazing role model women doing fascinating things in science. And we had well over 90% of the girls saying that it's made them feel more favourable about having a career in STEM, so very successful. We're now at the point where we're going to move away now from the big cinema stuff, and we're going to start really embedding the experiences. We've got the collateral, we've got the films, we've got the stuff. What we want to do now is reach as many girls as possible. And so we're now looking at how do we run that through visitor centres at our nuclear power stations en masse to reach lots and lots of young women, to encourage them to enter into the fields that we want them to work in. So that was our first initiative, very gender focused. And it's one of the initiatives that's fed into reality. So whilst we've been doing that, and it's quite difficult to stay in touch with those young women because obviously they're less than 16 and you've got safeguarding issues on tracking and following them, we have had and made a real difference in our engineering apprentices. So these are engineering maintenance apprentices. It's hands-on, on the plant, in the nuclear power stations with the instruments and the spanners. And we had 8% of our young women entering that scheme in 2015, and it wasn't enough. And so what we did, that 5-point plan for success, is what we implemented in order to change it, and we've now got it at 35%, which is still not enough, but my God, is so much better than we had at the time. And we looked at everything. So if you've got schemes like this and you're thinking about how to increase your attraction and your intake, I would recommend you don't play around the edges, that you have to look at every single step. We started with support from the managing director of that business, with targets of what we wanted to achieve. And those are targets, not quotas. It was aspirational. If we didn't hit it, we weren't going to put a woman into those roles if they weren't good enough for the roles, because that dilutes the quality of the role and totally undermines any of the women. But we did want to make sure that we had a target to aim for, because if you're hitting for a target and you make the right changes and impacts and efforts to get there. We did want to look at attraction. We've used the Pretty Curious engagement. We've changed our employer branding completely to make it far more visibly diverse. We looked at our social media strategy. We did some real targeted recruitment via various channels through Facebook, Twitter, and we introduced some Instagram stuff as well to get to the target market. We've trained our recruiters, we've trained our assessors, and we've changed how we did the recruitment, because we found that the girls were being spread out into the different teams because there was less of them, because it felt fair apparently to do it that way. Well, the impact that had on the girls was to not enable them to fulfil their potential during the assessment stage. So we put them into groups so that you had at least 3 girls in a group, and that has shown that they have outperformed much better in that area since we've done that. And we also changed the assessment methods. We were asking them, give us experiences of what you've done in mechanics. Well, a lot of them hadn't, because they weren't under the bonnet of a car with their dads. So we changed it, actually, because we didn't really need that experience. What we want is people who can follow instruction. In a nuclear power plant, it is very important that you do it the way we want you to do it. So we asked them to wire a plug according to the instructions. The girls outperform the boys here because they follow it to the letter, many more times, not every time. And therefore we found what we really wanted was what we needed to look for rather than what we thought we wanted, which we weren't testing for. And finally, when they come on board and they're on the programme, that we've changed the learning and living environment so it's much more gender neutral, it's much more inclusive when they come on board with us, and we've trained the staff that are supporting them through that programme. So every single element meant that we have retained over 90% of that cohort over the last 3 years. And the final thing I'm going to talk about very quickly, because I know we're running out of time, is what we're doing with our contract partners. This is particularly in HPC. It's quite a small thing, but it sets the tone. So we've made ourselves a video. And that video will be something that will be part of our onboarding. And you may be working for one of our supply chain partners at Hinkley Point C on the call now. Your staff will eventually see this when they onboard on site. We are just in the process of rolling it out. And this video really clearly outlines why we want to be an inclusive organisation. It sets the standard, it sets the tone, and it also talks, and we hear directly from people who are impacted by positive inclusivity stories. So, as you can see, the top left, the 2 women top left, I'm not going to say their names because I haven't got their permission in here to show it, but the top left we've got there from our supply chain partners. They are not EDF Energy staff. They also appear on our video showing how important it is through the supply chain for us. Obviously one lady's from a transgender environment, and she's found that she can flourish and grow within her organisation. She had to leave our previous organisation because she found promotion was denied to her as a result of her transgender reassignment. We've got a young lady there who works for another of our partners talking about her career path. And then the two gentlemen on the right, one of whom had some mental health issues, talks about how the support and acceptance that he got at EDF Energy has been really powerful from his environment, and one of our colleagues who's come from China, and the cultural differences. So it's not just one thing, it's lots of different ways you can be diverse. And that will be showing, and something that we're going to be putting out there and rolling out in our induction program. We're currently rolling it out with all our staff at the moment. And it's really important to us. So on the bottom left of that chart, you can see we actually have a better supply chain plan. And at the heart of our better supply chain plan is this diverse, the D&I elements of what we're trying to do. We want to partner with our supply chain to make sure that we are all building a more inclusive and diverse organisation. And hopefully that's given you some food for thought and some ideas. Thank you very much. Back to you, Richard.
Thank you, Fiona. That was absolutely brilliant, and I think particularly relevant in terms of Fiona's insights in regards to the supply chain. So last but not least, going to hand over to Nick from Cundall now, and Nick again will give us the Cundall perspective. So Nick, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Thanks, Fiona, for your presentation, and Yvonne earlier. I'm going to go rapidly through this, I think. I'm just going to give you an overview of who Cundall are. Cundall are a multidisciplinary consultant practice. We are engineers, various places around the world. We were established in '76. We have basically about 1,000 people worldwide. But one of our big key objectives, as you can see, is that we're a global company. Globally, that gives us a set of challenges, but today I'm going to concentrate on the UK. Now, Cundall have a very strong sustainability ethic within our business. We want to have strong leaderships that work through all our workplace environments, through our staff, even to our homes and community, and it's a very important thing that we do. As part of this, we have a One Planet strategy, which is our key mission to contribute to the world, and in which people enjoy a happy, healthy life, and they fair share of the Earth's resources, leaving places for wildlife and wilderness. Whilst this is all a little bit fluffy, Cundall actually, we do practice what we preach, and through that, we've got the initiative of the One Planet Living, which we are the first consultant globally to be awarded this by Bioregional. But the two things I think which are key for today, which I'll go into in a bit, are the health and well-being and the ethics and equality. So basically, moving on, diversity inclusion. Cundall basically have now got an initiative which I'm happy to be a part of. And one of the questions is, why do we do it? And I'm not going to read this out, you can read it yourselves, but basically the benefit is that we can see that if you have a diverse and inclusive environment within your business, you will also find that you'll have different impacts, different perspectives, different people working in different ways, and you'll have a diverse base of talent which you can draw on, and that benefits everybody within our business, our industry, and also the standard of work that we can deliver to our clients. It also improves our client base, because if they see us being diverse and inclusive, they can see that maybe we are people that they want to work with. So we created in our environment a diverse and inclusive environment for all gender, race and sexual orientation. We then provided a platform for our people to grow and develop their careers, and this was neutral. It wasn't anything else but neutral. We provided an environment for people to be who they are, to give them the ability to contribute and be valued, and provide a supportive culture within the workplace to identify ways to challenge any discrimination, which is led pretty much from the whole of the top of the company, with the management board, who look at the way in which everybody's treated within the business. Now, so why is diversity important to Cundall? As I said, it broadens our range of skills and experiences, it widens our talent pool. But again, it's more about getting a mix of people within our business that pulls on a greater mix of skills, experiences, perspective, ideas. But the benefits of this is you can't have it without an inclusive environment. You can have everybody working in separate areas. And personally, I've seen an awful lot of this. We've got quite a diverse range of people working in our Birmingham office, which is where I'm based, from all different ethnic minorities, from different backgrounds, different genders, sexual orientation. And for all of that to work within our office, we've had to improve and include an inclusive environment. Right, inclusion. Everybody knows pretty much what this is. The images on the screen pretty much profoundly show what it all means. Exclusion, integration, and inclusion. For this to work, Cundall invested an awful lot in time in our leadership, in the people that manage the team, so that they understand what all of this is. And we felt that this was really important to make people feel they were valued and that their contribution mattered to what we were doing. So therefore, if that's the case, you then provided an environment for them to reach their full potential, no matter what their background, identity, or their circumstances were. So we looked at the whole thing across the board, and pretty much these figures say that the people that, or the employees that don't fit in are pretty much what's displayed in the charts. Now this is pretty common knowledge. It's from an existing model for inclusion, which is pretty generally available. So what Cundall did was we took that and put that into our sustainability roadmap, which basically provided the best workplaces. We've all got the Cundall office in Birmingham, London, I believe Manchester and Newcastle are now all well standard buildings. And our offices are full of good lighting, natural resource as far as planting is concerned, and an environment which is good, and it's a balanced environment, but also that helps promote our equality and diversity within our business. It promotes an environment where people feel this is a little bit different. It's not your standard office environment, so people feel that they can be a little bit, maybe stretch their wings a little bit more. So we've promoted this through our equality, diversity, inclusion in our business. And personally, it's working really well. We're attracting talent from all sorts of sectors. And with the fact that we have actually got a skills shortage, especially in engineering, it's vitally important, which is probably why I became a STEM ambassador, was to go out to schools and colleges to actually talk about what we do. So how are we going to promote that through our business is by educating our leaders, looking at recruitment, but one of the key things is retention, so we want to try and keep our people. Celebrate the differences that we have. We've got the LGBT+ network, which celebrate pride in all the offices. We listen back to our employees. We have a way that people can communicate. Either they can do that, they can be very vocal about it, or they can do that anonymously. That's quite fine, but we can take all that data and evaluate that. We hold better meetings to try and evaluate what our staff are about and what they're expecting. But the whole of this is all building into an inclusive workplace where everybody has a voice. And at the moment, we believe that we are making great strides with this. The industry, construction, is a challenge anyway. The average age for a woman leaving the construction industry is 34, and 11% of engineers in the UK are female, which is the lowest percentage in Europe. LGBT students are 10% less likely to enter a STEM career, with 62% of the LGBTQ+ graduates going back into the closet when entering the job market. And less than 60% of LGBTQ+ people in STEM are actually out. So that's not a great thing to have as statistics. Whilst you start looking at the gender balance in the industry, in construction, we're down at about 12%, which isn't great. And what Cundall wanted to do is we wanted to do something that we could improve on this and improve our visibility as a business. So, as I said earlier, the female engineers, the UK is right down at the bottom at 87%. So the Cundall challenges where we started looking at our data, and we looked at our ethnicity across us globally, and there's some charts basically indicating the percentages across the business. We then looked at We had no significant changes in ethnic diversity over the last 3 years, though a minor increase in ethnic diversity. But looking at the actual sector average in the UK, industry is usually about 5%, and Cundall was slightly above that, which showed that we were actually making some progress. The other one to look at is leadership, specifically women in leadership roles within the business. We have got quite a few females working in Cundall, not as much as we'd like, as you can see. But as far as the leadership groups, 7% of the 1,000 that we have got across the business are female in a role of leadership. This has got to improve, and it's something that we've identified as a business, and something that personally I'm trying to improve in the Birmingham area by being more visible. So some figures and facts there. Now, last year it was decided that we'd start an LGBTQ+ network to support our colleagues in that social environment. So I'm heading that up. I'm the corporate sponsor for Cundall. So there's some facts and figures there which pretty much detail where everybody sits with this in the UK. But because we're a global business, one of the things we've got to look at is our ethics. And a lot of the places that we do have offices, which is in the Middle East, we have to be able to support and also identify with our colleagues that potentially are in an area where they're going to be discriminated against, they're going to have violence against them, bullying, inequality and mental health issues driven purely by where they're working. In construction, the Stonewall top 100 employers, the construction industry doesn't have one representation, which is pretty poor. And Cundall basically decided, and I'm 100% behind this, is to actually try and raise awareness of construction, of the construction industry, specifically in the LGBT network, but also diverse across all groups of gender, race. So Cundall's strategy on LGBT was to basically have office chairs across the business, have members and allies who get involved, and have a corporate sponsor who's me for the Cundall people. Now, moving forward, Cundall's view was we had to have some sets of KPIs, and they're all listed there, but the proportion of female hires for technical roles to improve that, percentage of women in our workforce, the gender pay equality, which was a big hot topic in the last couple of years, that's being pushed forward by Cundall, and I think we've made quite a lot of progress in there. Employees' feedback on pay equality, gender ratios in recruitment funnel. I'll keep going, but you can read that yourselves. And that's pretty much our KPIs. So moving forward, our initiative, the steps we've taken are on the left, which is a list of where we are. Steps to take, these are the ones that we've identified that we're moving forward. And should we? These are the ideal basics that Cundall want to do moving forward, which I'm trying to promote in Birmingham and across the business, in London, Manchester and Newcastle. And working with people like Hayes and getting involved with like the Alliance Network, and try and raise awareness, because for me, I believe that this is one of the most important things that we should be doing at the moment. So I'd like to thank you for your time. I've rattled through that as quickly as I could. So it's whether or not you've got any questions.
Thank you for that. That was absolutely superb. So, look, we're just going to open up the lines now for any questions. We've got a few minutes left before the end of the session. So, again, just to recap, if you go to the Q&A button on the bottom right-hand corner, and then we'll pick up any questions you have. So, look, quick thought from me, just as we're waiting for some questions to come in. I thought 3 really, really interesting presentations. There was clearly some congruence in the themes. However, very different aspects and insights coming out of each presentation, and I just thought, you know, as we went through it, we were all making notes in the room here, so I think that probably sums it up. So just before any questions come in, I'm just going to ask a quick question here to Yvonne. Yvonne, I think everyone's highlighted some multifaceted strategies there around D&I. What would your top tips be for anyone on the webinar today, taking their first steps? Is there any immediate sort of starting point, that after listening to the three presentations?
I think there would be. I think the first one is obviously that we're talking about the entire employee life cycle. So there's no point bringing lots of different profiles of people in if the lived experience is very different and doesn't really come anywhere near possibly the promise or the expectation. I think a requirement for focus and tailoring is really important. So one of the questions I would always put to customers of ours when they're talking about D&I is, this stuff is hard, and you have to show difference and some element of kind of progress. So element of being able to answer the question at whatever role you're in, whether you are a leader of business or you're a line manager, whoever's got some kind of influence and people responsibility, it is, if my team was more diverse and if our workplace was more inclusive, the benefit would be, and actually really get people to be very focused on what does this mean for them, what is the advantage, because it's only if they see the advantage that they will make some of the big steps they have to take to move things forward.
Brilliant, thank you for that. So we've had a question here, question from Rachel, thank you. I'll address this one to Fiona or Nick. So Rachel's question is, have you tried anything that hasn't worked, and what would your feedback be on that?
Yes, we have. We've tried a few things that sort of worked. So when I took over the role about 5 years ago, we were rolling out a program called Creating a Culture of Inclusion. And we ran that out with some of the leadership teams in the stations and across the business. And what we found was it was interesting, they enjoyed it, it made them think a little bit, but it didn't really lead to action. And so my recommendation there would be any program, and actually things like unconscious bias, they are really useful programs, but generally people find unconscious bias is lovely and interesting. They usually like the facilitator, they learn something about themselves, so it's a good, interesting thing to do, but you've got to follow it up. You've got to follow it up with tactical things they are going to do in their daily lives, back in their business, to continuously enforce it. So as well as revisiting training and follow-up, practical, everyday activities, got to follow it up.
Lovely, thank you. Nick, hopefully you're still on the line. Can I just ask the same question of you? Have you had any initiatives that haven't worked, and again, anything that you would reflect on as a learning?
I think it's basically trying to get people more involved. It can't be a singular thing where people just do it. There's a few people around the business that actually do it. You've got to have an awful lot of input from a lot of different people, especially when you've got sectored offices. So you need to have champions. And one of the things I don't think works is if you do it just from one office. So you need to have people actually getting involved across the business. And really have champions and people working together to actually make it work. And there's another question there, I think, was there any other staff groups other than the LGBT? I think that sort of links in with what's worked and what's not worked. There was an awful lot of concern that the women engineers within Cundall thought they felt they were going to be discriminating against the men in the business if they set up a women-only environment, which you can understand. But in other words, we more than likely want to promote that they do that, because they get involved with outside groups such as Women in Engineering, which is quite a lot in the Birmingham area. So there's no reason why the groups within the business don't develop more and spell across. And to be honest with you, in the last 12 months that's happened, but it's taken quite a lot of time to sort of tread water a little bit, where people are feeling maybe they're going to put somebody's nose out of joint. So there is what's worked and what's not worked is more to do with the fact that you've just got to get people involved to actually buy into the idea of what's going on and start helping to deliver it.
Thank you, Nick. Appreciate that. I think we've got time for one, maybe two more questions. So A question here from Samantha, so thank you, Samantha. So, is more analysis being done around D&I regarding BAME staff and their progression to senior management and leadership positions? Fiona, is this perhaps one you could pick up?
Yes, of course. So we track and monitor both gender and ethnicity, and we'd love to track and monitor more. Ethnicity on our HR systems is something we did a big campaign about to ask their ethnicity, so much so that we've got about 90% of people declared their ethnicity on our HR systems, which is good enough for us to say it's a really good sample size. And so we have got targets at both employee, manager and senior level for ethnicity and for gender. Are we doing as well on them as I'd like us to be? No. Are we going to continue to focus there? Am I speaking to the HR senior leadership team on Thursday about the fact that we're not doing as well? Yes. So you put the targets in place, you can track and monitor the progression. You can, we have a talent program where we make sure that the people that are within our talent pool are more diverse than the populations that we have from a gender and an ethnicity point of view. So tracking and monitoring is one thing, but making sure the numbers are moving by taking the appropriate action is also one of the things we've been focusing on.
Brilliant. Thank you. So we are going to squeeze in one last question. We've got about 2 or 3 minutes left. So question from Simon, and again, Simon, thank you for sending this. So Simon's question: I was pleased to see mention of a man with mental health issues at EDF who had been well supported. What changes were made to allow him to remain in post and flourish at EDF? And Nick, again, I'll perhaps open up from a Cundall perspective if you have one in a mo. But again, Fiona, over to you.
Okay, so personally, I don't know his case. What I can talk about is what we're doing more generally. So, and actually, if I did know his case, I still wouldn't talk about it actually. But one of the things that we're running in Hinkley Point, we are very conscious that we're bringing together large groups of predominantly young men, and we're asking them to work away from their homes. And this group, the white young men population, has got things like the high suicide rate, very high mental health issue rates. And so it's a big focus for us at the moment. So, for example, we're setting up a mental health support network to encourage openness and talking about it. It's about bringing it out into the open, and I think one of the things that we do well at EDF, whether the particular reasonable adjustments were made here, is say this is something we recognise is an issue. It's just something like you break your leg, you have time off work and you need to get better. It's just an issue, and it's not a stigma. And we're encouraging that openness by having more webinars, by having more conversations, by establishing networks where people can get together to talk about it. So the specific case I don't know, but actually the tone, the culture, and the openness is what we're trying to do to make it flourish.
Yeah, and I would completely endorse that, Fiona. So at Hayes, we celebrated, acknowledged, supported World Mental Health Awareness Day for the first time in October 2018. It was quite a big step for us, actually. And some of the leaders and the managers of the business, they needed a script to start talking about mental health because they were nervous. And so there was an element of common rail and just getting the conversation going, pointing to, frankly, I sometimes think an organisation's best well-kept secret, the employee assistance programs, if there are any. The resources are amazing if you know where to go for them. I think there's a communication piece there. And just everybody has mental health. And so actually one of the things that we did was we have 2.6 million followers on LinkedIn worldwide, and we have a platform called The Viewpoint that generates some really fabulous digital content. And so we had the CEO of Mind delivering a podcast to reach that wide audience. It was incredibly well received, lots of engagement around looking after your mental health because everyone has it.
And to build on that, if people on the phone are interested in doing something, we did a survey with Mind this year, which rolled out across the organisation and gave us massive insight. So from an HR perspective, if it's something you want to get into, talk to Mind about doing that survey, because it's really helped us with the recommendations and the understanding of where we're at and what we need to do.
Nick, we've got about 30 seconds before we wrap up. Any final thoughts from you on that particular question?
Yeah, Cundall got support mechanisms in place to support people with mental health, but then again, when you're on the ground with people that you should be your colleagues, your friends, your work, people that you build relationships in the workplace. And you need to look out for it, you need to support it, and then be understanding. The world's changing, and going back to what was said earlier about mental health issues is a 21st century disease, and there's a lot of people suffering from it. So I think we just got to be mindful of it, we've got to be careful, and we've just got to be supportive. And I think that's an awful lot that should be done at work.
Brilliant. Nick, thank you for that. So our time is up, so I'm just going to extend my thanks again to Fiona, to Nick and to Yvonne. I genuinely think they were just absolutely fantastic presentations. As has been referenced, a recording will be on YouTube of the webinar today, so please have a look out for that. And then finally, just to sort of draw your attention to some of the collateral that Hayes has, and if you're interested in any of this, if you go on to hayes.co.uk, and you can engage in terms of some of these reports. So thank you once again for your attendance, and have a good rest of the day.